I'm trying to find my cat filter. Good morning to you all.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
So I see Secretary and Auditor on, and I also see that my notebook is just out of reach. Hold on. I see Mr. Shaner is joined us. Mr. Shaner is the superintendent intending to join. Oh, there she is.
Mr. Chairman, I'm here, and I believe that the Mr. Shaner who is on is actually the father of Chief of Staff Dickie Shaner.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, you just popped up. Thank you.
Yes, he is our mineral leasing supervisor. So.
Aha. Aha. All right. Well, I think we have a quorum, and I think Treasurer Meyer may be just joining us. I think Jody's on. Good to see you, Jody. Oh, just a minute, they said. I don't see anybody upside down. Did everybody see the kitten video?
Yeah, that was funny. That made me laugh.
So, Secretary, there was a plane in Saratoga that lost its windshield. Was that a Mooney?
No, it was a Land Care, and took off from Afton, I guess, at 27,000 feet. You know, it's a pressurized aircraft and lost pressure because of the windshield, and had to scream down just very fast to get down to oxygen levels before they would have passed out. But yeah, they made it into Saratoga. So
Wow. Huh.
I can't imagine. I would imagine your eyeballs would have frozen up at that altitude during this time of year. So
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Huh. Well, Director, I'm assuming the treasurer can hear us, so why don't we proceed?
Okay. Mr. Chairman and members of the board, we're here today to present OSLI's Teton County Commercial Development Proposals Report. What we're looking for is we're soliciting feedback from the board on the report and the proposals that we received, and perhaps the next steps that come after this. Originally, we had additional topics on the agenda related to revenue generation, but in light of the uncertainty with the federal oil and gas leasing landscape, we kind of put a pin in those, and we'll come back with some other ideas once we have more clarity on some of those issues. But for today, the only thing on the agenda is in fact the Teton County Commercial Development Proposals Report. I would note that we have not provided an opportunity for public comment today. We're not asking for any action from the board today. We're just presenting, and there will be plenty of opportunity moving forward for public comment as the process goes. So I didn't want you to think we were excluding anybody, but at this point, public comment just seemed a little premature as we're just discussing the report itself. Deputy Crowder and I, we will do the heavy lifting today and presenting the report. We do have several staff members on the Zoom call today so that they can understand some of the questions that the board might have. And we also have our AG folks, Jim Peters and Pat Miller, here as well. I will begin with sort of a review of the legislation as to how we got here today, and then Deputy Crowder will review the proposals and the report materials, and then together we'll discuss some of the next steps. And I would encourage the board, if you have questions along the way, feel free to stop us and interject, and we can address those as they come. So we're ready to begin, Mr. Chairman, unless there are any preliminary issues or questions before we get started.
Director, just as just a note, and I don't think there's any traction to it, but I have brought up the Section 36 parcel with the White House. So.
Okay, great.
So you know.
Good to know. And I think Jason's received some feedback on that as well recently that we can talk about when we get to that parcel. So
Thank you.
excellent. So Jason, do you want to share your screen and start our fancy Prezi presentation?
Ooh, Prezi. Wow.
Yeah. We're big time now.
Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, man.
Okay, so as I mentioned, how did we get here? And as most of you know, there was legislation that was enacted during the 2020 budget session. And prior to this particular legislation, as I understand it, a year or two ago, there may have been other attempts with legislation to do similar studies related to perhaps Laramie and Natrona County. I think this particular bill started out as more of a global state look at development opportunities, and then it was subsequently narrowed to Teton County. So I thought first I'd go through the legislation, talk about what it requires, then I'll talk about how we've complied with it to date, and then we'll get into the report itself. So the legislation required that by August 1st, OSLI must solicit proposals for development of certain identified trust land parcels. Those parcels were to be located in Teton County. Proposals must maximize the value of the parcel to the greatest extent possible. And then, of course, it must generate revenue for the trust beneficiaries. Additional requirements, any person could submit a proposal. There wasn't any limit to that. Before we actively solicited proposals, we were required to provide a map and a list of all the affected state trust land parcels and other lands that were available for development proposals. The legislature said that proposals could include opportunities for commercial development, retail opportunities, recreation, agricultural opportunities, residential opportunities, but certainly the legislation was not limited to just those items. The legislation further said that OSLI was to review all of the submitted proposals and look for feasibility, and then to prepare a report wherein we would provide preliminary plans and recommendations for development of these identified areas, particularly those development opportunities that we had deemed feasible. The legislation prescribed specific things that we were to analyze as part of our report and reviewing the proposals. We were to identify and recommend opportunities for transfer, lease, development, or exchange of state trust lands, and to maximize the value of those parcels. We were also to identify any impacts to public access, be it increase or decrease, for hunting, fishing, and other recreational activities. We were to identify what, if any, impacts there might be to existing grazing leases, water rights, irrigation and drainage ditches. We were also to consider other opportunities that may have not have been included in the proposals that we believe would maximize the value of the parcels, again, to the greatest extent possible. Continuing on, OSLI was to further identify costs and sources of revenue to develop and maintain the opportunities. We were to estimate the time necessary to develop these opportunities. We were to look at potential changes to Wyoming law that would be necessary to develop and maintain the opportunity. The legislation did point out a review of the ability of the state to partner with private entities for some of these endeavors. We did not actually do that because we were not presented with any opportunities related to a public-private partnership, but we will certainly explore that as we move forward. Additionally, OSLI was to identify resources, including personnel, not only for OSLI, but other state agencies that might be required to implement some of the recommendations and opportunities. Next slide. The plans must ensure an opportunity for development on parcels that we retained all of our state royalty and other income interests in the parcel, that we weren't giving any of that away. Our plan may include only those that OSLI determined feasible and would maximize the value to the greatest extent possible. One of the other highlights was OSLI was required to consult with other agencies, local governments, and other interested parties. Particularly of concern to the legislators were that we would engage in good faith communications with representatives from Teton County and the Teton County Commissioners. We would recognize the objectives of the existing comprehensive master plan for Teton County, and we must consider all feedback that was provided. The legislation also provided a $75,000 appropriation and allowed OSLI to engage a research and consulting firm to solicit the proposals and prepare the reports. However, with the budget cuts, we ended up returning that $75,000 and decided to undertake the study ourselves. The legislation also requires us to provide regular updates to Joint Appropriations Committee and the Select Committee on Capital Financing and Investments. And then finally, the report was supposed to be wrapped up by October 31st and presented to JAC, to CapFin, and to the State Board of Land Commissioners. You may recall that we hand-delivered paper copies, if you will, of the report on that day, but we have not yet had the opportunity to specifically speak with the board to obtain feedback on that report. And we had indicated to JAC and CapFin that we would do that. But in November and December, as you may recall, the board was quite busy with CRG and all of that. And so we indicated that after the first of the year, we would get with the board to talk further about the report. And I also would note that under the legislation that the two legislative committees are to consider the plan, and either may develop legislation as they deemed appropriate to move forward. So let's talk a little bit about, that's what the legislation itself requires. So let's talk a little bit about OSLI's compliance to date. So on August 1st, we did make our maps and a list of all the trust land parcels in Teton County available on the website for those to view. We advertised for proposals on our website as well as through a Gov delivery announcement. We had talked with numerous legislators about it. There was a lot of word of mouth advertisement, if you will. We had a lot of inquiry. By October 2nd, we had received some 30 responses to our solicitation. We did provide copies of all of these responses to our sister agencies and the local governments and the other interested parties for consultation and comment. We engaged with representatives of Teton County and the county commissioners. We did, in our report, analyze every proposal for those 8 items that I previously discussed as required by the legislation, such as the impacts to public access, grazing leases, and water rights, other opportunities, costs, time, changes in Wyoming law, and identification of any resources and the opportunities feasibility. So what's the status of the report? As I mentioned, we provided updates to the legislative committees, to JAC on October 27th. When we appeared before them, the report wasn't quite finished, but we certainly provided them with an idea of where we thought things were heading. We did testify to CapFin on 2 occasions, on September 1st and on November 16th. And then again, the Board of Land Commissioners was reviewing the report with an eye towards obtaining the greatest long-term benefit to the trust beneficiaries, analyzing how to manage lands so as to generate income and maximize land values, And today we are here to facilitate the board's review and understanding of the report, and it's our intention to gather feedback and further direction. Before we get into the details of the report, there's a couple of notables, if you will, so I just wanted to bring those out. Before development, any proposal would have to follow existing board rules and regulations and receive board approval. So this isn't something where OSLI is going around on the side, implementing proposals and that sort of thing. They will still need to come to the board for approval. We analyzed each opportunity individually and characterized it within the report by parcel. So if you've looked at the report, you'll notice that each parcel is sort of taken separately, and all the proposals related to that parcel fall behind those maps, and also that you can kind of see what the different ideas for those parcels were. Some of the opportunities may be completed in combination with one another. There may be some access easements and additional leasing opportunities that can coexist. However, there are some proposals that we may need additional detail and information on to fully understand them and their impacts. We've sort of taken this incremental approach to development that would capitalize on existing state and agency resources and ongoing coordination with local and federal governments. We think that that's the way to highlight some of the most sustainable opportunities and get local buy-in. Additional notables, we believe that the majority of the opportunities that were provided in the study will not require additional resources by OSLI to implement. However, if there are some of the more complicated opportunities, or we're directed to pursue numerous ones at the same time, there may be impacts to staff load. Another thing that we really wanted to highlight was that not every opportunity was submitted as a proposal under the study. We fielded phone calls from interested parties, just general inquiries. They did not feel comfortable providing a proposal or a plan to OSLI unless there was a formal RFP in place. They were concerned that people might steal their ideas or get an unfair advantage with financials or other aspects of that. So on those parcels for which there are numerous parties that may be interested, if we get into the RFP process, we may see things that have not been articulated here in this report. Okay, with that, I would yield the floor to Deputy Cratter, who will take us through the report and some of those proposals that are identified in the study.
Thank you, Director. We've got a road to go down here to provide you with a lot of information related to the study. As Jen mentioned, feel free to stop us at any point in time and ask questions. I'm going to get tired of talking if there's not an interruption of questions, so please do that. So as Jen mentioned, we identified state trust land. That was a requirement within the legislation, and we offered a map as well as a list of parcels in Teton County and the actual legislation for people to review. And just to give you a highlight, this is what we provided to the public for them to respond to. We also provided a matrix before the report was ready. We had overwhelming requests for folks to understand what the proposals were that were coming in. So we did provide a whole list of those on our website. Again, these are the parcels that we are talking about today. We can use this map interactively as we continue our discussion. So at any point in time, if you'd like to bounce back and forth, please let me know and we can zoom in and out and provide any layer that you'd like to see. There are 18 parcels in total in Teton County of state trust land. They total 4,655.505 acres. The 0.505 is important when you're talking many thousands of dollars of value per acre. So we keep track of that. There were 13 parcels that did receive proposals. We got 30 proposals, as the director mentioned, on those 13. And the legislation required us only to provide a report on those that we deemed feasible. So of those 30, 6 were kicked out because they weren't feasible. And as we discussed with you early, some of those included, one of those notably was a tunnel from Idaho through Teton Pass into Jackson, and somehow we would charge a fee to use that tunnel. That wasn't specific to state trust land, so we deemed that one not feasible. The timeline is a fun slide, and I added it in here. Jen has already mentioned it, but I had the opportunity in Prezi to do it, so I did it as well. As you can see, this whole function went through the year 2020. August 1st, we initiated the solicitation of proposals. We also implemented a deadline of October 2nd to have those proposals submitted so that we would have enough time to review all the proposals, develop the report, and seek involvement and comments from sister agencies and other interested parties. And then we did publish the report one day early. I will make note of that, on October 30th rather than the 31st. We identified several buckets, if you will, that the proposals fell into. One of the first buckets we'll talk about is just routine trust land management. So a lot of the proposals came in, fit within existing rules and regulations, like the director mentioned, things that we can do right now without any changes to rule or statute, or really any major direction changes that the board would give us. Specifically to grazing and agricultural uses, I wanted to give the board an idea of what's currently out there and then the proposals that we received. So currently we have 5 existing grazing and agricultural leases within Teton County. Those leases return a total of $21,462 each year. And of course, that's adjusted based on the board's changing annual AUM fee. We only received one new proposal for a grazing and agricultural lease on a vacant parcel of land. Easements are also routine. We have 14 easements on trust land in Teton County. That includes our one and only conservation easement in northern Teton County on the southern edge of the Teton National Park. We received only one new proposal for an easement, and that was an access easement, a walking path that would connect a subdivision to the Snake River through existing state trust land and BLM lands. Temporary use permits. We have 12 existing temporary use permits in Teton County. The vast majority of those we'll get into in a minute. They're what I've categorized on the Highway 390 parcel. Those are all the landscaping and stockpile type uses that we have on that parcel. Those 12 existing temporary use permits return $30,262 annually back to the board. We did receive one new proposal for a temporary use permit, and it's for the same use. It's a new landscape company wishing to house their business on the parcel. Special use leases, we currently have 3 special use leases on trust land in the county. They return $35,613 to the trust annually. Of course, those are adjusted each year by 2 to 2.5% to keep pace with inflationary pressures. They're also subject to the 5-year rent reviews. These include cell towers. They also include mostly leases with the Game and Fish Department for habitat protection or providing habitat to wildlife. So we set aside grazing use. We initiated a special use lease process with the Game and Fish Department, charged them a very specific rate for that. And that's where most of the money comes from. We did receive 4 proposals within the study for what we put under special use leases. They included high-end residential development, conservation practices, and luxury camping. And then land transactions. We did get a few land transaction proposals within the study. One was for a single family development. One was to acquire the property, and the intent would be to maintain the ag and conservation values. And one was a possible exchange with the board to adjust the boundary on the what I call the Fall Creek parcel, but the parcel just north of Munger Mountain, to make easier agricultural use of the property. Those are all of the routine management items that we received. I guess I'll pause here and see if there are any questions from the board. Very good.
Any questions? Hearing none. My gosh, get another drink of water there, Jason, and can,
Thank you, sir. The next bucket that we recognized was the ability to do a federal land transaction. And obviously this board has a lot of experience with federal land transactions in Teton County. We've got a couple opportunities here. One is with the National Park Service, specifically Teton National Park, and the other is with the Bridger-Teton National Forest. Both have an opportunity to utilize land and water conservation funding from the federal government to acquire property. Both are in an analysis phase to understand if these parcels for state trust land, or really any within their ownership boundaries, raise in priority to be able to use those funds, and they're going through a ranking criteria now. But for state trust land purposes and the purposes of this study, we recognize 3 parcels that could fit into that bucket. I'll get into that. The first one is the Flat Creek parcel. It is totally surrounded by Forest Service. It really has no uses other than a game and fish special use lease for habitat, but that's all that it has. There are no other access points to it. It's publicly accessible through the Forest Service and adjacent National Park Service lands, but that is all we can do. It is a parcel that has been identified by the forest as something they could acquire. We feel internally in the office it is worth exploring disposal to the forest if they have LWCF funds available. Woods Canyon is the next one. It is just west, or just east, sorry, of the town of Jackson, up Cache Creek. It is also within a wilderness boundary. So we may not be subject to the requirements of a wilderness designation. However, all of the land surrounding us is, making us functionally subject to that designation. It is up Cache Creek. Again, it's totally surrounded by forest. We can do nothing with the property because of its surrounding ownership, as well as its surrounding wilderness designation. The forest has identified it as something they could acquire, would like to acquire. And again, we feel like it's something worth exploring for disposal. And thirdly, our favorite parcel, the Kelly parcel, is the last remaining parcel in the original agreement we had with Teton National Park. This is the last parcel we just weren't able to complete in that agreement. That agreement has since expired, and so this parcel is free and clear of any other agreements for transaction with anybody, including the federal government or Teton National Park. It lies on the east side of Teton National Park. Abuts the west side of the Grovant, or the Bridger-Teton National Forest and the Grovant Wilderness. It does have the highway running through it, through easement to the National Forest. As you remember from past discussions, that highway also comes with 150 foot on either side of the center line of the highway, a scenic easement. So no development can occur on either side of the highway for 150 feet, including an access road. And that's a question that we had come up several times during our previous analysis of this parcel. Could we just punch a road through that easement and then develop outside of it? And it was made clear to us that we couldn't even put a new road in. So if this parcel were to be developed in the future, access would have to be granted by the National Park Service or the Forest Service through federal land to get to the developable portions of this parcel. Topography by itself renders really only access from the southwest corner of the parcel into it through national park lands.
Jason?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, a little question on the scenic easement as far as how it was arrived at. It was that an act of Congress? Was that what's the I guess the regulations or the laws or whatever that govern that easement rights?
And we're talking specifically about the easement that lies on top of state trust land with the scenic easement. It doesn't go any further than that. And so with that, it was only the state statutes in place at the time, Wyoming state statutes and the Board of Land Commissioners rules that guided how we placed that easement there. It was a negotiation, if you look back into the file, negotiation between the land managers here at OSLI internally and the folks working for the Forest Service at the time. that would allow other access points if we needed it in the Bridger Teton to other state trust lands if we granted them this. The file indicates that this easement, along with the roadway easement, were given at no charge.
So we gave away our development rights for nothing.
Reading the file, Mr. Treasurer, it appeared that there would be other easements granted to access other state trust lands within the forest. We haven't identified a need for those yet.
Would those be any of these, the woods or the Flat Creek, or those are wilderness areas in our forest areas?
Mr. Chairman, sorry, Treasurer, they could be. Currently, there aren't good existing roadway access to both of those parcels.
Well, I'm just thinking if we were going to press that issue and we wanted to do something in the Kelly, that we would avail ourselves to the optionality of putting easements and put a basket of easements proposal to the Forest Service. And if they flatly rejected them, then essentially they've breached their contract to negotiate in any good faith and sue to have the easement abandoned. If we're not getting anything out of it, we gave it to them for nothing. It's restricting our development and further restricting the tenets of the original easement. So I think that's one way that we could probably force the issue, at least to, you know, get some movement on other potentials. And I guess, you know, that's just kind of a looking at some way to keep the ball rolling in a direction. And I'm assuming that when the original land board, you know, made a decision to make this trade, the future easements for this restriction, that you know, they contemplated something, not knowing what that was. I don't know if there's any historical perspective we can rely on, but I think that's probably the way to move forward on that. If we are indeed serious of developing any of these, it seems like that's the key. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. Other comments? Any questions? Well, Jason, on this parcel in particular, this is what I talked to Julie Rodriguez and David Hayes at the White House about. It was my understanding that they, Land and Water Conservation Fund, was burning a hole in their pocket. So.
And Mr. Chairman, we've had conversations with Teton National Park just yesterday, actually, and they expressed a good desire to move forward with the process to understand if there's a deal to be had here as well. We have a great deposit account for any money burning a hole in anybody's pockets.
Okay. Thank you. Just for my clarification, Jim and Pat, if there were something necessary, if I'm reading our Constitution correct, it would require legislation. Is that true?
Mr. Chairman, that's something I think I would certainly have to look into, and I'm not sure that I have an answer off the top of my head at this moment, but I can certainly look into that and get back to the board then with some thoughts whether that would require legislation.
Okay, thank you. Jason, you've been through this once before. Maybe you remember. I know at the time there was some discussion about the legislature getting into the executive branch, but if I'm looking carefully at where was it, the Article 18, somewhere in there, there was Section 4. I think there were maybe some language around that.
Mr. Chairman, you're correct. The language is that no state trust land shall be sold unless it's sold at public auction. And to get around that in the past, what we've asked the legislature to do is give us authority to get around that requirement. And that's what we did with the Park Service before, is we've asked the legislature for the the board to have authority to do a direct sale to a specific entity, at that time being Grand Teton National Park. They granted that authority, and that's how we completed the transaction. It makes sense to me if we wanted to do that similar type process to ask for that same type of authority from the legislature for us to move forward with a direct sale to a specific entity. One of the things that I have talked with the forest and the park about is a way to actually get that done. The legislature does have to grant that authority, but oftentimes, and that's what we saw in the previous transaction with the park, they'd like it done quicker than the federal government can actually move. So we talked about ways to ensure that we had a successful transaction here. And one of those ways was to move forward with some of the analysis, some of the due diligence, and possibly even appraisals prior to approaching the legislature for that authority, so that the legislature knew that there was a good deal to be had. We were a bit further down the federal process, so we could actually meet some timing expectations the legislature may have.
Thank you. Do we have any sense, Deputy Director, that the disposition of the land to the park would in any way improve or decrease or change the value of the other parcels we're looking at?
Mr. Chairman, I may not understand your question. It would be a direct sale. So what other parcels were you looking at?
Well, I was looking at the development potential of the other parcels that we're talking about in Teton County, because it's relatively clear to me that what's driving the scrutiny on Teton County are the real estate values. We haven't done the same thing for Fremont. We haven't done the same thing for Park County. We're really sort of squarely focused on Teton County.
Correct. Thanks for that clarification, Mr. Chairman. I don't believe it would. I would like to pull up this map for your review. This is the Kelly parcel at the extreme far north. Some of our ownership layers are a little bit screwy at this level, but you can see it has no bearing on the rest. It is completely isolated from it. It's the only parcel within the park's boundary right now.
And Deputy Director, just another question. Have you had any correspondence with regard to the elk? I know I said if they were going to close the elk feeding ground, they ought to donate it to Wyoming, since it was started by Wyoming in the first place. But I didn't know if they've had any conversations there.
Mr. Chairman, I have not.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary.
It is just quickly, and Jason, you may be getting to this, but outside of a direct sale, have there been any discussions with regard to an exchange for other federal lands? I know, kind of being new to the board, we talked about that probably a year or so ago, exchanging some of federal lands so that perhaps then we may be able to utilize those for oil and gas development. I don't know what the current pricing situation does to the exchange value, if you will, but just curious on that front what everybody thinks.
Mr. Chairman, Secretary, that's a great question. We went down that road a long ways prior to the expiration of the previous agreement with the Park Service. It was one way for us to create a value for value situation. As you can imagine, the values of land in Teton County, specifically ones that have views of the Tetons, are amazingly high, tens of millions of dollars. So they were having struggles finding the full acquisition price for a direct sale. And one of the solutions we came up with was an exchange. All within the Department of Interior at that time. That's where we had our discussions. BLM is within the Department of Interior. So we were looking at BLM lands that had high potential for oil and gas development, specifically in northern Campbell County, northern Converse County, Campbell County, and southeastern Johnson County. Those were highly blocked up BLM parcels that we could take advantage of, not only in a mineral sense, but from a surface sense. It was close to 120,000 acres or so, just to make the values match in that scenario. Looked to be a very good transaction for us. We did get a little bit bogged down in the federal process, meaning one sticking point that we really couldn't get over was the cultural review part of the federal NEPA process. With over 100,000 acres, that was going to take a considerable amount of time and effort and expense to complete that full review. The other part was the valuation that the feds were putting on their own lands, something that we didn't fully understand. And I think other pressures just kind of met at the same time as this issue rising its head, which caused the whole process to stop. But they were valuing their lands at only their oil and gas royalty rate, which is 12.5%. So each federal acre was reduced down to 12.5% of its value, greatly increasing the amount of acres needed for a value for value exchange. That wasn't a road that we were going down. That was something that the solicitors of Washington, D.C. deemed was appropriate. And that's really where the conversation stopped in the exchange scenario.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Treasurer.
I hope they keep that same evaluation. We could get all of the federal land for nothing in the state. That's a better deal than Oxy.
Yeah, absolutely. Other questions? So either director or deputy director, hearing no questions, what are the next steps? You'll present to JAC and Select Committee on Cap Finance, and then the full legislature, or what? Can you just review that again for me?
Mr. Chairman, we've got a couple other buckets to get through if you have time to allow us to do that, and then we'll get to next steps. We've got
Okay, thank you.
The next bucket kind of hits at the heart of the legislation, which was what are the development opportunities on the parcels in Teton County. We identified 3 parcels that really have the only commercial development opportunities within the county. The first one is what I call the Highway 390 parcel. It's the parcel that is directly south and east of Teton Village and along Highway 390. It does have a agriculture and grazing lease on it. It is the most lucrative agriculture and grazing lease we have. It has over 200 AUMs present. So that annual grazing fee is over $16,000. But why it's important from a commercial standpoint is that it also houses all the temporary use permits that I talked about in the southeast corner of the parcel. They are stockpiles for Teton County Road and Bridge, and then a lot of landscape businesses store their material, their working material in this area as they're doing work for people in the county. We also have a recreational activity here where a balloon company launches and lands their balloons in this area. This is a very important corner of state trust land. It's one that we've really paid a lot of attention to and have developed a lot of plans around, and have incrementally gotten better returns off of this corner as we've moved, and with new staffing within the office, as we've described before. We're developing a very good development or incremental competitive situation for this parcel that over time will meet the needs of the neighborhood, if you will. Right now, it's just a pile of rocks and trees and a lot of dirt roads. But as Teton Village grows, or the needs of Teton Village and the other surrounding neighborhoods grow, we feel like this corner could also grow to provide whatever. I use the term shopping malls or something like that, but it has the opportunity to develop into that. That need isn't there right now. We've done a lot of work with Teton County and planning and zoning guys up there, and they don't see the need as developed yet, but sometime in the future it could. So right now, what we'd like to do is implement a development competitive situation where the current users wouldn't have the expectation or entitlement use this forever. Each first they would have to come back and place a competitive bid on the use or the area that they would like, and we'd insert the market into that. We'd advertise that to anybody who would like to use it, then we'd be able to keep growing as the neighborhood moved along. But we're going to implement that next year and put that on a competitive situation. But it's a great parcel. It has a great view from the gondola coming down from the ski runs in Teton Village, and I've got a good picture of that coming up. I can move on to the next parcel unless there's questions about this one.
Jason, you broke up a little bit as you were describing the competitive nature of what you were proposing. Could you just cover that?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Yes, so we would offer these lots, if you will. They're somewhat defined, but somewhat pliable as well, in a competitive nature where other people besides the existing users could come in and place bids to do their activities on it. And we feel like implementing that reduces the expectation or entitlement that the existing users have for using that land and keeping us a little bit depressed in the market. But also, as we introduce new users, we feel like we would grow with the neighborhood, the expectations and needs of the neighborhood, moving into higher end type uses and allowing the market to dictate that for us.
So a quick question on that. That is an agricultural lease, I think, is it not?
Mr. Chairman, it is. The whole parcel is under an agriculture and grazing lease, that including that southeast corner. The acreage that is removed in those temporary use permits is compensated back to that existing grazing lessee through our surface impact payment process.
Sure, and I appreciate that. As we look at these modifications and changes and looks at that, are we setting any precedents that may be difficult for agricultural users? I'm thinking of Sheridan, Buffalo, Branchester, Saratoga, places where real estate prices and the potential there may cause similar sets of concerns, and would that compromise agricultural operations?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a fair question, and it's certainly a possibility. As you move commercial development or any kind of development onto a parcel that's been historically used for grazing and agricultural purposes, you do displace them. In this specific example, one of the reasons why we've kept the grazing lease spread over that southeast corner is that the majority of the irrigation structure is in there. All of the head gates coming from supply ditches out of the Snake River are in that southeast corner. And so allowing the lessee to have control of that land, to be able to manage his irrigation practices was very important to us to be able to have the continued ag and grazing use on the rest of the parcel.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the next parcel we'll identify is the one that's just north and west of the town of Jackson. It's on that extremely steep hillside as you come into Jackson from the south. It's also the parcel that I won't say created the landslide, but the landslide and the loss of the Walgreens store just underneath it occurred on this parcel. It is largely unfriendly as far as topography goes for commercial development, but we do have a lot of special use leases on this parcel already. Most notably down in the southwest corner is where the Teton County Search and Rescue have their headquarters. It's where they base all of their operations out of, land their helicopters and the like. The other is the town of Jackson has a city water supply and pipeline, obviously, that goes through that. They've also discussed, and I'm not sure if they've made much movement towards, but with the topography, it's a great place to place communication antennas for their emergency responders, such as police and fire. We've worked with Teton County Pathways in the very southeast corner to help develop a bike path and a hiking path and a walk path along the existing highway there. In the past, there was a lot of, pedestrian and bicyclists running into deer. And so we worked with them to relax the topography, remove a lot of topsoil, allow for a better development of that pathway through that area, and reduce the amount of deer cyclist collisions. This is also a very good corner as far as topography goes to add additional uses in the area. We've had some interest in that area to do many different things. About 5 years ago, or 3 to 5 years ago, we had an interest to put in another rodeo arena and have nightly bull ridings in the area. That use didn't pan out, but it's an example of people knowing that they can develop that area because the topography is friendly compared to the rest of the parcel. It was also mentioned yesterday that it slipped my mind, but it's a great example of a use of a hillside like this. There was a group who wanted to add a mountain bike trail or a hiking trail that would take advantage of the risks and challenges that the topography gives it. So we would put trails on there and could lease that out as well.
Very good. Yeah, that is difficult. It does seem to me that there's a transmission line that runs across there as well.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that was granted as an easement along the very southern line. We've also granted an easement for a spreader ditch to allow runoff that would come off of this parcel to be spread out and around this subdivision so that future landslides could be mitigated as well.
I see. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the third parcel that we recognize for commercial development is the Fall Creek parcel. It's on the very southern edge of Teton County and the northern edge of Munger Mountain. What we have identified for this parcel is the luxury camping idea, or glamping, in the area. It's a very good, very beautiful part of the world. We currently have a recreational restriction on the parcel because it's also one where folks in the past have done a lot of trash dumping. You can get out of sight from anybody, and they've done a lot of mud bogging in the area. So we've developed parking areas and have coincided recreational closures as far as using the roads, worked with the adjacent Forest Service, Forest Office to mirror the restrictions in the area and just continue the same management across ownership boundaries. The proposal that was given to us for glamping is an interesting one. We've not had that in the past, and we've had a lot of conversations with that group as well as the Teton County Commissioners to understand what the impacts would be to the local neighborhood and the ability to actually get that type of use on the ground. We're still in those conversations, and we anticipate continuing those as the proponent wants to move forward. This is an area I think that is a very good example, as the director mentioned in her opening remarks, that we would offer an RFP out to everybody and go through the state of Wyoming's A&I department's RFP process to get broad solicitation of anybody who would like to use this parcel. We've only received one proposal at this time for that type of use, but in order to make sure we're inuring to the greatest benefit of the beneficiaries, we would expect to go through that RFP process as well. It is an interesting parcel in that the area where uses have been identified in this is somewhat of a bowl. It's somewhat hidden from the town of Jackson, from the adjacent highway leading up into Jackson, and wouldn't be necessarily seen. So it seems friendly as far as the topography goes and the view shed to move forward with something like that.
Thank you, Deputy Director. Like, quick question on that. How far is Astoria Springs from that?
Mr. Chairman, Astoria Springs, as I understand it, is further east from here, probably 6 miles or so. I'd have to look at a map. I apologize.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, looks Superintendent may have a question.
Oh, sorry, Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't even know enough to be dangerous in asking this questions, but in listening to conversations in the legislature in 2020, I know that the concept of development, and in particular commercial development, included things like hotels, casinos, perhaps residential, which I understand may fall into a little bit different bucket than what you've talked about right now. But it seems to me like Fall Creek might be the only one that would be a little bit ripe for that, based on the information that you provided on the other two. But I just wondered if you could talk through a little bit of that and how sort of you reconciled that conversation in the legislature as you did this work, received proposals, and had a discussion as a staff.
Mr. Chairman, Superintendent, I think that's a very good question. So our job as the staff is to actually get sustainable revenue generating uses on these lands. And we allow the market to largely tell us what that is, instead of us forcing a use in a particular area that may have unsustainable attributes to it. The market can bring it to us. In order to bring it to us, they've done a lot of forefront work to understand if that use is actually sustainable or not. There was a lot of discussion about very large commercial development opportunities as the legislators, specific legislators, thought. We didn't see that bear out in these proposals. We didn't see any of those types of proposals come through. So I guess that would be my answer on how to reconcile it. We simply didn't see that. Our experience in the area is that maybe the majority of these parcels is not conducive to that. In fact, I don't know that Fall Creek is necessarily as conducive as this parcel in Jackson, the very southeast corner, because you're right adjacent to town and you have the infrastructure right there. But again, all of these uses, and specifically uses of that scope and scale, we need to have very good coordination and communication with the county commissioners and the county planning and zoning individuals. A lot of infrastructure is needed for a use like that, water and sewer and power and all of that. And there's a lot of federal ground, and there's a lot of very important ground to go through to bring that infrastructure to these parcels.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a follow-up question or just make a follow-up comment? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess, you know, that first of all, thank you for that information. And I appreciate the objective approach and discussion that you have as a staff. And I guess, you know, what I'd like to maybe lay out for the chairman as well as the board and other entities is that the coordination is complex. It is complicated to make something other than what we traditionally do with state lands come to fruition. And I think that conversation probably has to lie with the board and the legislature. I feel like the board the legislature did a pretty good job last year of aggressively discussing this. And I just wonder, you know, and this isn't necessarily a question for you, Deputy Crowder, but just maybe a more of a wonderment for the board. But I wonder where our entry point is into that conversation. Do we wait for them to come to us, or take a more aggressive role as a board and start coordinating with whether it's the business council or the county commissioners or other entities to really try to flesh this out a little bit more to see where the development could take us if we were in the driver's seat versus sort of waiting for it to come to us. So again, that's just a point I would raise for the chairman and the board. And maybe there's nothing there, and I'm certainly not advocating that we move in that direction, but it might be worthy of a discussion, more discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Superintendent. And I take that under advisement. I don't know if Jim or Pat have any color on it, but I think it's a very important concept that you're bringing forward.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that I have a whole lot of additional color, but I think as Deputy Crowder mentioned, it's just sort of, you know, working together to make sure that everybody's on the same page with the goals going forward.
Thanks.
And, Mr. Chairman, I want to belabor the awkward pause, but I think that's something that we internalize every day. We have conversations with program managers here and local officials, the planning and zoning, all the planners in Teton County as well. We've gone up there and have sat down with them and discussed the needs of the county and how can state trust land be a part of those needs? How can we just not be set aside as open space, but actually utilized for development to generate revenue, basically. And so I'm not sure the appropriate insertion point by the board, but it is something that your office, this office, does on a daily basis with the constraints that we have, which is largely around staffing. So. Mr. Chairman, if there's no other questions, I can move on to our last bucket here.
That would be terrific. Thank you.
So we heard overwhelming response to preserve or conserve the view shed, the natural attributes of these parcels, the habitat, just the everything that makes Teton County wonderful. We received a lot of proposals for that, and so we categorized them in a couple of different ways. One is term leasing, the other is a perpetual easement. Perpetual easements have largely been guarded against by this office and the board, because that really does tie the hands of this board and specifically future boards for any future uses, development, anything that you'd like to do in the future. It just binds your hands to doing that. We currently only have one conservation easement on state trust lands within the whole state, and it is in Teton County, and it's in the northern part that abuts the Teton National Park. But since that point in time, we've not done any more. So we've largely resisted those. And in conversations, and as this plan was being developed, we started talking more about term leasing, or the idea of conservation leasing being something that could monetize the surface attributes that certain groups or the public in general hold very important, but allow a return back to the board. This is also what I call the hold bucket. So there are 18 parcels in Teton County. We've gone over a few buckets where a few of these parcels sit, but there are parcels where the board should not just sell or should not develop right now in our mindset from a fiduciary perspective. To set those lands aside and use them 50 years or 100 years from now for whatever the benefit of the beneficiaries' needs are at that time. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't be monetized, and monetizing them in a conservative way to protect those attributes, those values makes sense to us. We've had a lot of very good conversations with interest groups in the area to continue these conversations, to develop a lease that would be agreeable to all sides, would have some specific terms that would protect the values, would allow for revenue to be generated from the protection of those values, but also put sideboards up that doesn't limit the board's ability to do something with these parcels if a use presents itself or another opportunity presents itself. So I don't have all of those lands specifically identified in this presentation or on the map. In the conversations with those special interest groups, that is one of the next steps, is to identify those parcels so that we can move forward with them in consideration of all the other things we've already spoke about.
Mr. Secretary, I have a call right now. Can you kind of lead the discussion just a bit?
Be happy to, Governor. Any questions from the board with regard to this conservation bucket? And was that all, Jason, or was there another piece to that?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's all that I had to offer for this. Is mainly we're at the very early stages of this discussion to move forward with it. One of the good things I do think is there's a lot of momentum to be had in the conservation, monetizing conservation realm, and any traction we make here could be spread across the rest of the state. And we see that as a positive.
Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Deputy Director Crowder, I appreciate this, and I think this is an interesting space for us to explore in light of a lot of things. I also see, its popularity in that follow-up correspondence to individual members of the board has been in this space as well. I was just wondering if you could discuss or kind of ballpark, like where would the monetization be in comparison to like an ag lease or a mineral lease or what have you? What is, how does it fall? If we're ranking sort of what are the most optimal uses of land to what are the least, which would be free, free use of the land or set aside, where does conservation or where does the staff see it falling, given its momentum, its popularity, and given that it's in Teton County?
Mr. Chairman, Superintendent, that's a fantastic question. And our go-to answer is always, this is for the kids, so aim high. So we always work with the proponent and the applicant to determine what the best charge should be. Obviously, with conservation preservation thought process driving that type of monetization, you need to be very parcel specific. You need to know all the attributes that that parcel provides, if it's grazing, if it's oil and gas, if it's something different, and that will largely guide how much on a per acre basis the fee should be. Additionally, the sideboards that I mentioned earlier in our conversations with the interest groups in the area, they don't necessarily want to have, in every instance, a complete control of the surface. Going back to the Fall Creek parcel, there is an opportunity to do the luxury camping as well as protect the view sheds at the same time. Those are compatible in our eyes. And so we would expect that the terms of that lease would allow us to do something like glamping as well as protect the view shed from high rises or something like that, and monetize both of those. But every single one is very unique. Every parcel is very unique and would have to be analyzed on a very specific basis.
Mr. Chairman, follow up?
Please, go ahead.
Deputy Director, you may be the first high-ranking government official in history to use the term glamping in a public meeting. Well done.
Mr. Chairman, Superintendent, I disagree. The Teton County Commissioners are much higher ranking than I, and they use it quite often.
Mr. Chairman.
Auditor Racinas.
So Jason, I think you summed up this use very well, and also the benefit to monetizing lands without locking them up into perpetuity. In my simplified mind, in some ways, I wouldn't see the process being drastically different than leasing for other purposes. And like you said, it's very, very parcel specific. So to the superintendent's point, a conservation monetization in the middle of Teton County may be slightly different than, just as beautiful and valuable, but somewhat different middle of Laramie County, for example. Help me understand what that process would look like. Would it be different, or would it need to be different than some of the things we already do? And I guess the point I'm getting at is, it seems like setting up that process would not be exceptionally complex or exceptionally time intensive, but I would guess that there's some complication behind that I don't know about. So help me out with that.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Auditor, that's a great question. I think that we see it exactly like you do. It would fit under our vehicle of special use leases. There's not a lot of terms that would need to be changed other than the use and what was expected out of that use. So we have some performance measures within that agreement with whoever that applicant would be, meaning that, you know, we're not going to go put a hotel up on one of these parcels because that's what you're paying for to stop. However, the other part of that is existing situations within those special use leases. Special use lease that, or a conservation lease or something doesn't necessarily stop that high rise from occurring. What it does is allow that existing lessee to be at the table when we're determining what we should do with that parcel. So there's the lessee consent process. There's a lessee comment form that goes along with that. The board is made aware of any concerns that the lessee has. So it really provides an opportunity for the conservation group or whoever that lessee is for conservation measures to be at the table as we're analyzing additional uses and as we're presenting those to the board for ultimate approval.
And just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Is it accurate? And, you know, I'm going to speak in generalities. I mean, people are beginning to start to try to give us money for this purpose, and we have no vehicle to accept it.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Auditor, we currently do special use leases with the Game and Fish Department for habitat. This would be a spinoff from that as well. So there's not a direct vehicle. I think you're correct in that, but it's a vehicle that doesn't need very many changes to move forward.
Thank you.
So, Jason or anybody, is there a prioritization list by these categories that is best suited to meet the timelines of this legislation, or even meet the timelines of practicality as far as, you know, what we should pursue? It seems to me that, you know, some of these parcel specific issues and things that would require consideration of you know, these special types of leases might be a more intensive discussion, taking a longer period of time. And then on the other hand, you know, outright sales might be the easiest, but an exchange with the federal government seems to take forever as well. So just wondering if there's kind of a sense of a way to proceed categorically.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a great segue into our last slide here. So really, Jen will have the final say in the upcoming slide, but I wanted to present this picture to you. This is something that I stole from the Advocates for State Trust Lands website. This is what we're going to do. We're going to do everything we can off of the uses that are available in Teton County to populate that permanent land fund or permanent land income fund for the benefit of our beneficiaries. But you're exactly right. You can't do that all at once. And as the director mentioned in her opening remarks, we have limitations here internally to be able to move forward with those. We also want to make sure that we're taking advantage of opportunities as they present themselves as well. So I'll let the director finalize her thoughts on next steps. We can go off of that discussion as well.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as I mentioned when we first started the presentation, our real objective today was to get some feedback from the board with respect to, are there certain things that they would like us to prioritize moving forward? As Deputy Crowder identified in the presentation, there may be certain things we can do that make sense under our existing rules and regulations, such as that access easement that they were talking about to get the access to the river from the residential area. There may be other things that make sense, like the federal land exchanges or disposals, and we can certainly embark upon those at the direction of the board. We also believe that there's going to be further analysis needed regarding some of these things like glamping and whatever else, and other opportunities that we may think there might be for some of these parcels. We have to look at our existing statutory framework and our rules and regs and decide, can we do this under some of those existing statutes? Do we need some statutory changes? In which case the legislature would need to weigh in and help us do that. And then finally, as Deputy Crowder noted, there are situations where there's multiple interest in certain parcels, like the Teton Village little corner and things like that, where several parties have expressed an interest in development. So what makes sense to us is to get more of a market exposure, do a request for proposals, something that we could evaluate and decide what we think is, and have the board determine what's in the best interest of the trust beneficiaries moving forward. So it's sort of a multifaceted next steps. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and as I noted when we started all this, there's likely opportunity there that we haven't even evaluated yet, as there were certain inquiries related to, hey, if this isn't a bona fide RFP, we're not sure that we want to weigh in right now. So this is sort of how we see moving forward, just progressing on what we've ascertained through the report here, and taking into consideration the direction from the board. One of the things that we really think is necessary, or that we would recommend, is further investigation into this conservation leasing idea. And while it may well fit within some of our existing examples with game and fish, and some of our existing leasing, there may be some issues that we need to kind of drill down upon, if you will, and further discuss in order to make sure that we are in fact taking every advantage of monetizing conservation. So we've got some background and some work to do ourselves, but this is sort of the top 4 things that we recommend moving forward so that we can get a little more clarity. The idea today was just to present the board with, here's what we received in the way of proposals. Some of them are very interesting. A lot of it was expected. We expected there to be a lot of conservation requests. We also expected there to be a lot of interest in the federal land disposal or exchange. So some of that makes sense to maybe begin the process on some of that. So anyway, we would love to hear more from you, board members, and if there's a certain particular thing you want us to get more information on, we can certainly do that. But obviously we've got some internal discussions with the AG's office and others about existing law and precedent and all of those other things. Jason, is there anything else you wanted to add on to that?
No, ma'am, I think you did great.
So Deputy Director and Director, I think a lot of that makes great sense. On the conservation piece, I think that's an extraordinary contribution maybe to trust land management west-wide that would be valuable. I wonder, and maybe you've already done this, I wonder if there isn't I hate to call it a white paper. I don't know if it's more of a concept paper, because I think there may be a number of issues that arise, and I'd hate to sort of put on notice, this is our intent, if we are still trying to flesh that out. And the ones that come to mind are, if you remember the challenge we had with that parcel, I think south of Dayton, where it was somewhat unclear if the landowner was really just protecting a view shed or didn't like cows out there, and the other landowner had an agricultural use for it. I think there may be issues about where in the stack of priorities conservation will lie, because I can see the value, particularly as you look at easements generally on adjacent private lands, that would be a nice way to sort of incorporate those. But I would hate to have those easements somehow preclude development of minerals or, you know, something like that. And so I think there's maybe some work to be done there. And then I think the purpose of conservation, because it could be, you know, viewshed conservation, it could be watershed conservation, could be wildlife habitat conservation, you know, it could be wetland conservation. And I'm wondering how we would kind of look through that. So, you know, I'd hate to sort of say, let's put a proposal out there until we've had a chance to really kind of think about that. And Jason, I don't know, maybe you've already done that work, but I think it's, you know, clearly on the little chart of uses that you had, conservation wasn't on that, but it is becoming much more valuable. And I think the potential for conservation investments, not just because the land's pretty, but because of other aspects, could be pretty rewarding in time.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just respond to that, I completely agree with you that we need to do some more research and perhaps put together a white paper with, you know, pros and cons and issues and how we would propose addressing issues, what have other states done, that sort of thing. I don't think we meant to suggest that we're just going to forge into a conservation lease arrangement right now, but we certainly think that it's worth looking into and seeing if there is a program, if you will, to be had centered around conservation values at least. And is there a way to monetize that, but yet exactly, you're correct, not tie up minerals? What does it look like? What would a conservation lease look like? You know, you would have to allow for other opportunities that presented themselves for the board to be able to review and evaluate those as against the, you know, the conservation principles. So I agree with your suggestion that we kind of drill down into this a little more and perhaps present the board with further information about what we think a conservation lease program might look like, along with some of those addressing some of those issues that you pointed out before we would embark upon something, you know, as a result of this study.
And Director, I think that's absolutely correct. One of the interests that I have in that is I think we struggle a lot of times to figure out what a market looks like for conservation related activities. And this, to me, would have groundwork more in a true marketplace as opposed to a regulation or some sort of governmental program. I think it is so from that's the reason I suggest I think it could be a huge contribution to trust land management in the West. Mr. Treasurer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple things on conservation easements, I guess. And I got to thinking about that the other day when I had a letter that probably all you received too about the potential of conservation easements driving up some prices. But it was all premised on the assumption that minerals would never be developed. And I think one way maybe to get around that presumption is to put a clause in anything that would be like that, that the surrounding 8 townships, if there were any mineral productions on those, the conservation now or in the future, the conservation leasee would have to pony up the amount of money that either the private or the state leaseholder would normally receive if those minerals were developed. So it kind of insulates us from the discussion about the possibility of losing the income off of minerals if you take the 8 townships around a township that has the conservation lease in it. allow for the mineral revenue off of that to set a bar for the I guess additional payment above the straight conservation lease. And to the point, Mr. Chairman, also that you made about some people don't like cows on conservation leases. I think we should make it clear that agricultural leases the exclusion of agricultural leases are exempted from conservation leases. So we don't have that particular problem. Make it expressed in statute. If that's probably the best way to handle that. If not statute, at least in rules. Those are the two things that I think I'd say on conservation leases. Another thing, Mr. Chairman, I guess I have another topic that after we get done with conservation leases, I'd like to revisit some of the legislature's thoughts about gaming, and but I'll stop for now on the leases.
Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, because one of the main purposes of this meeting is just to solicit feedback from board members, I wonder if I could just make 4 brief points in no particular order or priority. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Okay, so first of all, I think we're all excited about the potential that conservation brings, and I'm excited, Governor, I think you said it really well. It may set a precedent for the entire West, and we can think about it in terms of market value in a new way, because it's a new concept, at least for us. Second, I guess I'd really like to keep nodding to the legislative discussion that took place in 2020, which really centered a lot around commercial development, and make sure that we kind of continue to flesh that out in the most appropriate way. And it seems to me, and this is the third process, like we're right on the precipice of, instead of letting other people do the work and come to us, where we do have an opportunity to be just a little bit more assertive. I think seeking the proposals was one way that we as a Office of State Lands and a board really were a little more assertive in seeking feedback, and then just synthesizing all of that and moving forward. So I just would encourage, first of all, thanks to the office for doing that, and just encourage us as a board and staff to continue just thinking about how can we cast that net wider and continue to but to be assertive in the way that we approach the use on the lands. And then, fourth, I know that the legislation was fairly specific to Teton County, but the auditor made a great point that I just want to underscore, that, while we're thinking about Teton County right now, so much of this can map to other parts of the state. And I always want us to keep that door open. So, Mr. Chairman, I just, again, want to thank the Office of State Lands for preparing this, for doing all of the work, and again, nod to the legislature for starting this conversation, because it's a really important one for us to have today and to continue. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Wonderful, thank you. Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In thinking about steps forward, and this is just me thinking about what we would want from Owsley, as next steps. All good conversation. I would envision, and maybe this goes along with the white paper concept, is quantifying each of the things that we've really talked about today, as far as timelines, our statutory timelines, federal law timelines, NEPA process. I mean, it's going to be a large list, personnel required, unique parcel analysis, great interest versus less interest. We talked a little bit already. Market price for the variety of types of leases you see out there, legal issues, and what are some quick wins. And I think if we could develop a list of factors that you could quantify so that we would have a vision of where we could start first, because it seems pretty overwhelming for personnel reasons and otherwise for us to kind of just jump into it, and kind of follow it where it leads us. I would think we could develop a matrix, quantify these certain factors, and then say, here's what we're going to concentrate on first. Here's what we're going to tackle first. Because this is a process that is going to, I think it's a good process. It's a good idea, but it's going to take years. And, we need to figure out where to start. And I think it needs to be very quantitatively driven, so that as a board, we know what our priorities are. Maybe we can get some quick wins, and go from there. So I would envision, maybe it's just one sheet of paper after all of this is evaluated, to say, here's where we're going to start. We'll work on all of these things simultaneously, but here's where we're going to start, so that we've kind of got a plan going forward for the next, I don't even know how many years, but it's a good start.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Other comments on these topics? Auditor.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I fear I may be repetitive to some of the things other folks have said, but just so that we give Osley the most direction they can have, or the most confusion perhaps. But I tend to agree with the priorities that Director Scoggin listed out. I think, my knee-jerk reaction is that the potential, a potential transaction of the Kelly parcel with the feds is somewhat time sensitive, and I would, just for myself, potentially move that towards the top of the list. Not saying that's the right way to go, but I think it is time sensitive. That there's a bunch of money available for that now that may change or not be so in the future. So I think that's a valid endeavor to explore. And then I do think setting up some sort of structure for conservation uses would be the next priority for me. And I think the low-hanging fruit there is to monetize conservation on sections that have no other bidders. And we have had that happen, and we are currently turning that money down. So I certainly understand we don't want to lock up that land forever, but I feel like the particularly low-hanging fruit is when someone is trying to give us money for a conservation easement. No one else wants it for anything at the time, and it seems not responsible to set up that structure, in the near future. And obviously, some of those competing uses get substantially more complex. The next one I would address, the bigger, I think, more complicated parcels in my mind are the commercial, the parcel on the village road and the commercial development thereof. I think we keep them at the forefront, but they're also the biggest unknown, because I think, as is recognized by Osley, we truly have no idea of what the interest is in that until we actually put out the RFP. So it's hard to ponder decision making, because if we just look at this report, which is very good, I commend OSLI on that. You say, okay, well, we had one commercial development proposal and they pulled out, so no one's interested. And so I think eventually moving forward on that with a more formal process that truly evaluates the ideas and the opportunities when it's the real deal. And going back for a moment on the number 2 point of the conservation lease, I think that both you, Governor, and the Treasurer made some good points about being cautious about not locking up the land too much, but if we water down a conservation easement to the point, it will then be not valuable. We will demonetize the conservation lease if we say, okay, we'll do what you want until just until something better, slightly better comes along. And I think those are all discussions we can work through in the future.
Well said, Auditor. As we were talking through that, and I just was curious, either Director or Deputy Director, there was some conversation, and I don't think it was really definitive, but there was some conversation about the cost of housing in Teton County and our ability to house state workers. Was there any contemplation of, sort of sectioning off a parcel? And I don't think you'd look at it in terms of total return to the corpus off the rental charge, but you look at it as cost foregone. Have we done that?
Mr. Chairman, Jason, you might want to weigh in here. I'm not sure we have done that process. I think we did have a proposal for residential development, which was subsequently withdrawn, but I'm not sure we looked at, a state or lower cost housing opportunity and what the cost foregone would be. Jason, do you have anything else that I'm unaware of in that regard?
Yeah, Director, Mr. Chairman, we've had phone call conversations about potential or opportunities, but that's as far as they've gotten. They get overshadowed quickly because of where these parcels actually lie. It's hard to put something on the Teton Village parcel as far as affordable housing and things like that. So we're open to the conversation. We've had a few just over the phone, but nothing substantial.
So, Director or Deputy Director, would it be possible? This is a little bit sort of conceptual, so I apologize. But would it be possible to identify the sort of necessary housing needs, with defining it somewhat? I think you've got workforce services, you've got family services, you've got game and fish, you've got YDOT. There may be others, but just sort of run-of-the-mill kind of thoughts of what the housing would look like or the cost of housing would look like, because it's pretty clear to me already it's very difficult to find housing for, really, you could talk about teachers too, that can be afforded there. And if this year is any indication of real estate prices in Teton County, that problem is not going away. But I just wondering if we could look at that and maybe have some sort of conceptual idea of what the savings could be to the state's operating budget if we were to do something like that.
Mr. Chairman, I completely think that would be possible for us to look into. Jason, do you want to add that to your list?
Absolutely. And Mr. Chairman, I think it's probably on our way to our email right now. This is not a new issue to Teton County. They've looked at it extensively. So that information will be easily found.
Thank you. Other comments, questions, thoughts? Mr. Treasurer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that last issue, the WCDA has a lot of information on there. There's actually been a lot of projects that we had to turn down that had free land given to developers because some of the federal rules. having to do with the average income in Teton County and what we could and couldn't support. I think if you get into the specifics in some of those programs, there may be some way for the state to augment different federal programs or enter into some kind of a partnership in the WCDA process where you could get quite a little more housing in affordable housing started. I think we have to also be cognizant of the fact that that Lincoln County is basically a bed and breakfast county for Teton County, that we have a lot of development in Lincoln County. We've put a lot of infrastructure in Lincoln County that we have to be cognizant of any type of government program or action which detrimentally affects the economy of Lincoln County and just builds an overbuild in Teton County, which solving one problem necessarily creates another one. So they're more or less an extended community of Jackson. So we have to be aware of that when we move forward, just the impacts that might happen there. Briefly on the gaming issue there, Jason, can you pull back that slide you had, a couple slides before that you lifted from another website? Yeah, that one. I think we probably ought to put gaming up on the top of that. This is an aside to land issues, but if you took the cowboy draw and basically took all of the revenue off of that, put it into the permanent land school fund, I think that might be a successful way to implement another revenue stream into the permanent land school fund. I have no idea what the cowboy draw does, but it's our own lottery. It is kind of separate. I'm not sure where those streams go, whether they're the same as the Powerball and Mega Millions, but that's I think an idea. As far as the not being able to suitably develop that section there that has the topography, I can tell you in Colorado, they will blow a mountain away, haul it away, and build a casino inside the mountain. So, you know, there's a amazing amount of things that can be done because of the revenue in there. However, I would caution us, if we're actually seriously contemplating gaming, that necessarily Jackson Hole isn't the best place to put it, that there's a lot of issues there. They have their culture, they have their draw. It would, I think, interfere with a lot of the tourism value that that area has. But there is one place that is an exciting possible place. Is Evanston has a state parcel right on I-80 that is about an hour closer than the Nevada casinos in Wendover. And you have millions of people in Salt Lake area that you can draw from that necessarily will not negatively impact to a great extent the gaming or gambling problems that people would have in Wyoming, because most of the Utah or Salt Lake would probably go to that area. It's a sufficient size to locate several casinos, and I'm not sure if it's a state school section or not, but if you're actually looking for gaming, that's probably the best place in Wyoming that has the least impact, but the most economic gain.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Are there further comments, questions?
Just to say, Mr. Chairman, I think that we can do a higher up priority thing, but I think in the long run, the marketplace, people are willing to invest capital. I think those decisions are going to be made on an economic basis, and we need to be cognizant of what we have to do to help those entrepreneurs proceed. And it's going to be, I think, difficult to say the least to do a lot of anything in a county that necessarily doesn't apply to let's have a lot of growth for everybody because it's good theory.
Good point. Thank you. Other comments, questions? I don't see any. Director, Deputy Director, I think extraordinary. Thank you very, very much. Lots to think about and really some exciting opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the board for your time. And I realize that I think we've given you 2 hours to your day back because we didn't go as long as we had anticipated.
Well, very, very good. Any other matters to come before this working session?
No, Mr. Chairman. Oh, unless the board, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, Mr. Chairman, that's the only thing that we had on the agenda. As I mentioned, we have some other revenue generation ideas and things that we will come back to the board with eventually once things have quieted down a little bit on the federal landscape.
Mr. Chairman, I just say great presentation. Enjoyed it, very informative.
Superintendent.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Maybe just one last thought, and I'm just looking at the notes I made today, and it seems like the conservation pitch that we received was kind of like, well, because of the federal landscape and because of the direction that we're going, then maybe conservation is a good thing to think about. And I appreciate that sentiment. However, I really appreciate how Osley presented this as a yes and. Like, yes, we can do conservation and still maintain that umbrella of all of the other uses, and in some cases even use the same parcels for that. So I just really appreciate not trying to substitute one for the other. This really is a yes and a really wonderful opportunity for us to expand our thinking as well as our methodology for utilizing our state trust lands. So thank you.
Thanks very much. Well, if we have nothing more to come before us, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved by the superintendent, seconded by the treasurer. All in favor signify with a thumbs up or an eye. All thumbs up across the screen. Thank you, everyone on the call. We are adjourned.
Thank you.